Next slide. How do we do our work? We really have three distinct program areas. One is legal, second is advocacy, which is internal community organizing, and then external reaching out to government and making sure that they create rules that are SIC-friendly. And then our last program area is education. I'm going to go into detail in the next 3 slides on all 4 of these. Legal. Legal is basically our firefighting. If somebody is fired from their job, if somebody is the victim of a hate crime, if somebody is told, listen, if you want to come to this restaurant, you have to remove your turban. We will go and use our attorneys to say, listen, the law is being violated. Unless you conform your actions with the mandates of the law, with the mandates of the Constitution, we're going to bring legal action against you. So that's really the job of the legal program. It's firefighting. Next. Advocacy. Advocacy is basically our work to try to create rules that are SIC-friendly. So a good example of this was last year we did a survey of sick children in New York City schools. And we published a report based on that survey. That survey found that of the 400 sick children we surveyed in New York City schools, more than 60% suffered bias-based name-calling, the sick equivalent of the N-word, Bin Laden, Taliban, terrorists, all these sort of denigrated terms. And about more than 20% also suffered unwelcome physical touching based on their religious or national identity, national origin. We then approached the New York City Department of Education, and we held a rally. We had a bunch of press conferences. Our reports were cited in the New York Times, the Daily News, Newsday. Columnists started writing op-eds saying that the city has to do something about sick children being harassed in New York City schools. The long and short of it was through advocacy, we were able to persuade New York City to implement a system for tracking bias in schools, for reporting on bias in schools, and addressing bias in schools. And that regulation actually affects not just 6, but 1.4 million students in New York City. Similarly with advocacy, let's raise your hands. How many people here have flown an airplane? Flown in an airplane in the last 5 years? Okay, the SIC Coalition has touched your work, touched your life if you've flown in an airplane. Through advocacy, we're able to persuade the TSA to implement rules that address how and when a SIC should be searched and what type of scrutiny they should be subject to in the airport. So that's advocacy. It's that long-term work you need to do to create rules that are SIC-friendly. Next slide. Community organizing. This is the internal work we're doing, and this forum, even though it's a fundraiser, it's also community organizing. It's work to make sure that the community understands its rights, and then when we're ready, that the community actually takes action to exercise its rights. So I'll give you a good example of community organizing online. With the TSA campaign, we created an online petition. A lot of people think, well, I sign a petition, who cares? Who looks at that? What we were doing with this petition with the TSA was every 500 people who were signing the petition, we'd send an email to the head of the TSA notifying him that another 500 have signed. In 3 days, we had 5,000-6,000 emails, so his signatures, so his email box got flooded. And basically by that time, basically after 2 or 3 days, he said, listen, stop emailing me. I'm working on the issue. But that's a good example of community organizing. Another example of community organizing was what we did in New York City. When we had that report, we saw that the situation of bias against sick kids was so bad. We had over 306 march in the streets of New York City, which was covered by the press, to demand that the city implement a regulation on bias-based harassment in schools. So that's organizing. Last one, education. This is the long-term, but very necessary work to create a world where when somebody hears the word sick, they think good things. When somebody sees a sick, they think, oh, that's a follower of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, and Guru Nanak Dev Ji was against the caste system and believed in equality for all. Oh, that's a follower of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and Guru Gobind Singh Ji gave the Sikhs a uniform that we should love and trust because that uniform binds us to values that everyone should love. That's the education program. It's long-term work. When Bina Kaur, who's pictured here, just began that work last week full-time as the education director. Next slide. So let's just keep pressing the thing until it goes. So in terms of the growth of the organization, there's not much to say on this slide other than that we were formed on 9/11. We were a volunteer organization. In 2004, we opened our first office when I started full-time. And in the last 2 years, we've had phenomenal growth. We've grown from, in January 2007, we were at 2 full-time staff. January 2009, 2 years later, we were at 8 full-time staff, soon to be 9 full-time staff. But this is unheard of, and our operating budget is up to $1 million a year now. This is unheard of in the SIG community. We've never had an organization that's staffed at this level, that has offices now in multiple cities, that's getting support from mainstream non-SIG foundations because we meet their grant requirements, and is getting obviously a lot of support from the SIG community. But the group has been able to gather the resources. Next.